Hi everyone, good morning, good evening, sorry. Welcome to the webinar of the Draft Arts and Culture Strategy. We're coming to you live from Perouse Museum. I would like to acknowledge that we are on the land of the Bidjigal people. And the Bidjigal and Gadigal people, and acknowledge that all the lands that people are watching on from wherever they're watching as well. Pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to any Aboriginal people in attendance today or watching online. I'll introduce the fabulous panel of experts that we have here this evening. Roxanne Fee is the head of the Perouse Museum. Dennis Golding, who is a Kamilaroi and Gamilaraay artist based in Randwick, and Dr. Michael Cohen, who is the Director of City People. I might just ask everybody to please, if you're watching, put your name in the chat, and also let us know if there's anything that you particularly would like to get out of the discussion tonight. Please feel free to pop questions in throughout the discussion, and we'll either respond to them at the time or at the end. I'll just give a bit of a background on where the Draft Arts and Culture Strategy has come from and the journey that it's been on. So the Arts and Culture Strategy is one of 6 informing strategies that Council has written or will write that will inform our community strategic plan. The Arts and Culture Strategy is a 10-year plan, and if you haven't read it, I encourage you to do so. It's not a 100-page document. It's a really short and sharp snapshot of where we're headed in arts and culture. It gives really practical and measurable outcomes, and it's a good read. Actually, if you've read it, maybe put a bit of a thumbs up in the chat so we know. We won't assume that you have for the purpose of this discussion though. It came from the fact that the council recognised that there was more opportunity for arts and culture in Randwick. So we commissioned a study that looked at what we're currently doing, and we already are doing quite a lot. We have this museum, the library run hundreds of cultural activities every year. We've got lots of dance troupes, choirs, arts classes in all of our council venues. And we also run a grants program that funds lots of cultural activities as well. But what the study did show is that there's lots of opportunity for us to do more and to partner more with other people for arts and culture also. So we developed, we commissioned the study, we developed an internal working group of council staff to write the strategy, and we did that in partnership with our Arts and Culture Committee, which is an external committee that has council staff, councillors, but also some experts living and working as artists in Randwick City. So now it's up for comment. So it's online. We're seeking feedback from the community. So really wanting to know what everybody thinks about it, what we've got, and any comments. So people can have their say online until the 28th of June. So to kick off, I'd just like to ask our panel if you can all tell me about a memorable cultural experience or event that you have had or been to and why it sticks in your mind. Roxanne, I might start with you.
Thank you, Katie. And I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land that we meet tonight, who are the Bidjigal and Gadigal people. It's a great question. There's been so many, but I would have to say it's the very environment in which we're sitting here, which is our most recent exhibition at Perouse Museum, which is Shallot, a celebration of shell working here at Perouse. We're actually sitting behind Dennis's amazing illustrated cape, but this project is a partnership between Bimani Aboriginal Co-op and Perouse Museum, and it was curated by the amazing Mirikuri woman, Kara Kum Singh, who worked in partnership with some of the leading Aboriginal artists of New South Wales and also with the community here to create an experience that really celebrates the tradition of shell working in a way that brings it up to contemporary language and contemporary art. So it's this beautiful partnership that we're very honoured to be part of, that celebrates this museum being on Indigenous land and celebrates identity. And just the opening events, the several events we've had here, had the community come in and just have, you know, conversations around the work and continue those memories. So it's been a real privilege for us, and for us very memorable.
Thanks, Roxanne. A memorable experience living here in the last 25 years. So I grew up in Sydney, born and raised in Redfern. I've moved out here on the eastern suburbs for the last 25 years on my stepfather's country, on Bidjigal country. Learning as an artist and hearing the stories from many elders, but in particular, and it's so closely connected to what Roxanne was talking about, of the shell work practice. So really highlighting the cultural practices of Bidjigal women, of how they use shell work to create and reclaim stories. It's been a long practice, generation to generation, and I've been very honoured to work with Ani Esme Timbri, a senior artist and a Bidjigal elder herself, to understand her history, her connection to country, but also understanding the community of La Perouse, of their cultural knowledge of country as well. So, yeah.
Amazing, thank you.
So yeah, it's hard when there are many, because we're in this field a lot. Okay, so I'm going to give an example that is quite different, but it draws on similar themes, and that, I guess, around really being tied to place. About, you know, so I went to this event, it was years ago now, and it was on an island in the Netherlands, and the only way to get around the island was by bicycle. And the island was covered with these arts events and performances and installations and things that happened in barns, on beaches, in villages. And thousands of people go there and they camp or stay in the villages and things. And everybody would go to these shows. And so I remember distinctly going to this show, 8 o'clock at night. Everybody went by bicycle. And so and then we turn up to see the show, and there were like 1,000 bicycles there. And then we watched this show in the sand dunes, effectively in the sand dunes of this island. And it was a show, it was a physical theatre show, and the show was not wonderful, but the whole experience, you know, it was about this ship. It was about this ship and the physical people flying off the sails and all this kind of stuff happened. But the thing that was wonderful about it was that it really kind of resonated with the place. You know, it was a place where there were lots of shipwrecks and things. And so it was the way that cultural experience really tied to the place that I found really striking. And that's, I guess, something I'm always looking for.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you. That sounds incredible, actually. I'm going to go different again. I have a really vivid memory of going to the Mardi Gras parade when I was about 10 years old. And that really sticks with me as, you know, it was everything creative. It was the dancing, it was the music, it was, I guess, you know, when I was 10, I didn't quite understand, but the political statements, it was art, it was glitter. So that's always stuck with me. I've been obviously since then, but just that combination of all of that is just, yeah, something that sticks with me. So very, very memorable and creative. Hello to Marie from Coogee, who is watching on Facebook. Thanks for tuning in. Okay, so when we did our study, which came before the strategy, we actually found that we have quite a rich and robust arts and cultural sector in Randwick. But we did find that a lot of artists are going outside of Randwick to work and exhibit. Dennis, you're a local artist, and we're sitting under this this beautiful work of yours. Can I just ask you to tell us a little bit about your work?
Sure. So this work here is titled Illustrated Cape. So before I talk about it, what you see is a superhero cape that has different pictures, smaller paintings that speak about memories of my experiences of being on and off country. So as I mentioned before, I'm not from this place. My traditional lands are the northwest of New South Wales and Kamilaroi country. My family's moved to Sydney back in the late 1970s in Redfern and now moved out to Bidjigal country here in La Perouse and Malabar. This speaks about that memory of my own childhood memories of travelling to and from country, finding a connection to a new country as well through my stepfather's country. And what you see here from the bottom right is this glitter painted pathway that you see that rides straight up to the top left, which is that pathway of the roadways that we use to travel back on country. And among all those different experiences from times of travelling on that road, we've seen kangaroos running, alongside the car on the flat surface of the landscape. Memories of the yellow belly fish from the country and the Barron River. I was fishing with my grandfather on the Barron River there. But all these different paintings talk about memory and the strength of how we can begin to represent ourselves in a very strong and powerful way. And that's why I use the superhero cape as a visual motif to give stronger and empowering representations of Indigenous cultural identity.
Thank you. It's stunning, and what lovely memories. Can you, as an artist, can you tell us a bit about what are some of the challenges artists are facing in general?
I think some of the challenges, as I'm coming into the emergence of my creative practice as a visual artist, working in photography, video, painting, is finding accessibility to experiment with your work. And if you are working in a number of mediums of painting, photography and installation, you need space. And so that's something that I realized coming into professional practice as an artist, is that space is important for us to actually do our work and to present our work and to create a space for people to see your work and to exhibit. Through university, in art school, we were told from our teachers that hold on to your studio spaces and try to make them last as much as you can. And I'm finding that now. So I'm lucky enough to have a residency with Carriageworks in the studio program at the clothing store, another building attached to Carriageworks. But I'm not going to be there for long. It's only a year program. And so I'm looking for new studio spaces. And I think that's a really big challenge what artists face, is finding the space to make.
Yeah. Okay. Lovely. Thank you. That's certainly something that came through in our study. So hopefully we might be able to help find a solution for that. Can you tell us a bit about how First Nations art contributes to the identity of Randwick?
First Nations art, in my belief and in my practice and what I try to do as an artist, as a curator and a creative producer, is to make stories visible, to enhance the stories of First Nations people. And I think it's something that as council and as a community, we need to really share these stories and allow those stories to be accessible. And that's why it's important that artists and First Nations artists have the opportunities to work in creative spaces, but also within the public art sphere, is to be made more visible in them spaces. And if I reflect back on my own work and why I use the superhero cape, I tend to use photography and video work by draping a superhero cape on an Aboriginal figure that looks over the beach and looks over the seascapes of Botany Bay, but local beaches as well. And what I'm trying to challenge in that image is seeing how the Aboriginal figure draped in a superhero cape looks across the landscape to provoke these ideas of disruption to country, of how a people has been impacted by colonisation, but understanding the contemporary issues and visibility of beaches in particular. What we see on the beaches today is predominantly white bodies, and my work and many other artists and what they do in their practice is to make visibility because it's something in urban spaces that Aboriginal bodies have been rendered invisible.
Thank you so much. And that's such a key thing for Randwick's cultural identity and the sort of the unbroken sort of history here at Lapa to First Nations people, and obviously the way that the beaches were used and embraced, you know, ever since. So that's really interesting. Thank you. Can you also tell us a bit about who influences your work?
So who influences my work? Definitely my mother. She handed me the paintbrush when I was 3 years old. We lived in a small 2-bedroom terrace home down in the block on Everleigh Street in Redfern. I remember as a young kid seeing Mum paint on these large silk fabrics of different cultural motifs of animals such as turtles, cultural symbols that reference meeting place, or water holes, and all these other iconographies that talk about country and connection to place. And that's when I started to be inspired by her work as an artist, and seeing that my grandmother also speaks strongly in the public sphere to community, to represent community. That's really how my work started to develop more and have an understanding of needing to work with community and collaborate with others to create a bigger conversation about place and about our identity today. Yeah.
Thank you. That's really beautiful. I bet your mum is really proud of you as well. Oh, she's in, here we go. We'll come and see the Shellett show at the Lapis Museum. Michael, I'll throw to you now. So Michael is a director at City People, and City People are experienced in placemaking and bringing places to life. Michael is a practicing artist and has lots of experience writing strategies and implementing arts and cultural programs that build stronger communities and better places. Public art is a key component of the strategy. So we really want to visit the public art policy that Randwick has currently and look at what opportunities we have in that area. Can you tell us a bit about what are some of the benefits that public art brings to the community? And can you give us an example of where public art has been done well?
Sure. So I've got to say I'm probably a bit split on the old public art thing, because sometimes I find public art becomes invisible. You know, sometimes a big object, you put a big object in public space and people don't really, you know, they look at that and they look at the bus shelter, and after 10 years, they probably can't tell them apart. You know, and I'm being facetious here, but you know what I mean. So, and yet public art can be really quite wonderful and inspiring, and can get us to think about where we are, and can get us to, you know, really engage with the place where we are. So that those moments are where public art is really doing its job, where it's kind of pointing to the place, where it's it sits comfortably in the space that it's been given. You know, it's not kind of parked in a bad corner of the car park that they didn't know what to do with. That happens a lot. And where it's playful, it encourages some engagement. You know, it starts a conversation, or maybe it's a swing that you get on. You know, there's that piece, that swing in the old women's hospital grounds in Paddington, and there's a work there, Michaela Dwyer's work, I think it is, and it looks like a big ovary, and you sit inside the ovary and you can have a swing. And, you know, so there are ways that, you know, public art can really get you thinking about, because obviously that piece is talking about that place, but it's also fun, and kids swing on it, they don't even know it's public art. Hooray. You know, for me, that's when public art is doing a good job, is when it's pointing to the place and it's really engaging, and it's not just kind of an awkward bit of plonk. Because a lot of the public art, and I guess this is why I was a bit at the beginning, a lot of public art looks like it's just been dropped by a helicopter. You know, you bring somebody, and, you know, it's like, what does it do for that place, this big, you know, kind of bit of hunk of metal made by a man in his garage, and it's slowly rusting into the pavement. For me, a lot of that stuff, I'd just like, oh, let's move on, you know. And there are so many much better ways for public art to be engaged. And so, yeah, I think when it's done well, it can really lift us to see our places in new ways.
Yeah. Thank you. I think you're right, and probably one of the challenges for us is that we have lots of different areas in Randwick and they're all very different. While we'll have an overall public art policy, I think we need to be really careful about just plonking down public art for the sake of it, and also probably working with the identity of that suburb to make sure that it does resonate and it's playful and engaging and interactive as well. We have a question from Helena, a local artist, who has suggested it would be great to have more options to exhibit here locally. She has asked for a timeline for council's plans to turn Blenheim House into an arts hub. That's a good question, Helena. Roxanne will talk a little bit about Blenheim House in a little while, but we've got a couple of things that we're looking at. We're looking at starting the works there at the end of the year. It's about to go through to a DA process, but there will be opportunities for local artists, which is fantastic. And as I said, Rox will touch on that. Maybe if we do have anyone who's seen some really great public art who's watching online, if you want to maybe just pop that into the chat too, so we can have a good list of things that are great, and also if things are not great, you can put those in also. Michael, still with you, how can art and culture be considered in placemaking?
So I would probably, from the beginning to the end of this conversation, come back to the same kind of things, because it's just what speaks to me about how we use arts and culture in our places. And so placemaking is this kind of scary word that people say, and I don't think any of us in this room could come up with the same definition, because it's a very contested kind of, it actually serves a lot of different functions. I think but if we are, inevitably we end up a lot in government, state or local government, we end up using this word placemaking. I think it's interesting to talk about creative placemaking or culture-led placemaking. And for me, that's where arts and culture can get us to think about place. And place is also a bit of a strange word. I think it's really easy to get your head around place if you think about it three ways. You go, okay, place is about physical characteristics. That might be the headland, it might be this building, it can be built form or it can be natural. Place is about community, and it's about how communities use spaces. So we're in Perouse, as we talked about, the Aboriginal occupation of Perouse goes back thousands and thousands of years, but especially also we think about it as a kind of a colonial, in post-colonial kind of era. The community's ownership here is amazing. So that's obviously about communities, and then it's also about stories. It's about histories and memories. That's also about place. So those things I think about place. And so arts and culture, to get to your question, arts and culture is like best served for placemaking, actually, because it's great for getting you to think about places. The projects that Dennis has already been talking about, and Roxanne has been talking about, they are arts projects that talk exactly about place. I think for me, so the thing I hate about placemaking is that people think it's mostly pallet furniture and oversized pot plants and a kind of one of those things that they call parklets, which are just kind of these things like, they look like big ashtrays with dead plants in them. That's what people think placemaking is. That is, for me, that's terrible. I think we can go so many more places, and I think artists are the best people to do it, because that's the artist's job.
Yeah. Thank you. You touched on it before too. It can sometimes be a way of solving a problem as well, which is not necessarily just sticking a piece of public art that people walk past, but there can be some creative ways as well. And I think I love the way that you think about it in three ways. I think that's a really good approach. Vanessa on Facebook is asking if there is an advertised calendar of art exhibitions, etc., available. Yes, Vanessa, there is. We're just actually working on a bit of a better way that people can access that information on our website. It is all on there, and we put things on social media and Facebook too. Roxanne, you're the head of the La Perouse Museum, and the strategy has big plans for the museum. Actually, if anyone watching online has been here, please put a thumbs up in the chat so we know. How can the community and creatives engage with the museum to access arts and culture?
Thank you, Katie. Hello, everyone. I think that's a really good question. I like to think that that's happening on a daily basis here anyway. As we open the doors, we get such incredible diversity of audiences that come here, many of whom are artists working in the arts and others are those hungry to explore arts and culture. I think some of my answers here will also have relevance for our other council facilities like the Randwick Literary Institute and Blenheim House, in that these sites really were there to create opportunities, not just for consumers, for audiences, but also for artists and practicing artists as well. And there's a whole range of ways of doing that. Certainly, the strategy tells us that artists are very hungry for places to exhibit, and that's to a limited but growing degree. The museum can help there. We do have an exhibition spaces where we do have temporary exhibitions. So make yourself known to council staff. One of the things that the strategy will also explore is a database of creators and artists. And the more that we know who's out there, the more that we can make connections and nurture opportunities for practice and for sharing ideas. But there's also just that immediate interaction. We had an artist the other day just set up in one of our galleries and start sketching one of the artists. Sorry, not one of the artists, one of the artworks. So there's that sort of immediate interaction with artwork, which we'd love to sort of host as well. But I think it's really about creating a string of sites where artists can really express themselves and find places to practice and share ideas and challenge us to do more in terms of providing that space and that place for artists to create.
Thank you. So in the strategy, we have identified an approach that we will transform the La Perouse Museum into a flagship cultural hub. Can you tell us about some of the ways we'll do this?
Thank you. Yeah, so it's a big challenge. This is a big and historic building. I hope some of you have been to the museum. Hello again if you have. So council took over this museum in 2017 and it's a state listed building. It's an iconic building. A lot of people know it as the red building in the middle of the headland. It has a lot of potential and we have a lot of challenges, but luckily we have an incredibly important foundation, which is really the stories of this area and those stories having international resonance, really. I mean, this is a museum of firsts. Well, that started off as a French museum. It rapidly evolved into sort of 5 broader themes. We nurture and share and tell stories about the traditional custodians and the Aboriginal community here at La Perouse, the French connection, the French explorer was here for 6 weeks, the European arrivals as well, plus science and communication, the environment, and social history. And all of those themes are of real great importance to the history of Australia. So we're starting to activate the museum by having a really dynamic public program. We do about 20 or 30 public programs a year, which are really popular, and temporary exhibitions as well. But really, the sky's the limit. We just have to really plan carefully and work with the community to develop a building and a structure that can take our big plans. So it's going to be quite a long journey. A lot of what we're doing now is interim activation, and already we've had almost 70,000 people through the doors since we opened in 2017. But we've got long-term plans for this museum to become something that hopefully the community of Randwick and indeed of Sydney and beyond will be really, really proud of. So it's a case of watch this space and please visit the space while you're watching it. Okay.
Thanks, Rox. In your opinion, what do you think arts and culture contributes to our community?
Nothing like a small question. I'm sure we all have a very different view on that one. And I'll just, I guess, my view will be sort of personal. But I think it's a universal one that for our community in Randwick, for La Perouse, for Sydney and for beyond, I think it's about endless opportunity. I think arts and culture is a very human experience, integral to being human. So, it provides endless opportunities in learning, education, entertainment, employment, communication. I think arts and culture is sort of like the beating heart of a society. And I think as we find here in this museum, in a very complicated place, La Perouse, that it also breaks down barriers of communication. I think, as Dennis said beautifully before, art and culture provides a language not just to celebrate, but also to deconstruct very painful conversations. I think social injustice can really be addressed through art. So it's a way of breaking down boundaries with a new language. And I think in the end, and part of that journey is to create pride and identity. And I think for Randwick, that's a really important opportunity.
Yeah, no, that was a great point there, Roxanne. It's strongly about activating spaces as well. I think as an arts and cultural sector, we have the power to create space that is inviting for people to be part of something and to be part of a dialogue and to have the conversations about some of the heavy loaded stuff that isn't always easy to talk about. And I think it's creating that space and activating a space for people to really feel safe, and to really express creativity too.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. I think another really great thing about this strategy is that, Randwick sort of overall vision is to build a sense of community, and the stuff that we are doing in this arts and culture strategy is the tangible. It's not just written on a paper, it's there for people to see and experience. So that's a really exciting thing. We have a question from Mimi. She's asked if council would consider revising the opening hours of the museum. She understands it's geared towards weekend visitation, but seems to be closed whenever she is in the area. Rox, would you like to? What's her name?
Mimi. Mimi, you have a beautiful name. I'm so sorry that we've missed you during your weekday visit. It's a good question. Currently, the museum is open weekends 10 till 4, but we are open Wednesdays and Fridays 10 till 2 as well. So please do come during those hours. Currently, with our sort of growing resources, we're operating at 20 hours a week, but we do have plans to broaden those hours. We do get a lot of people literally knocking on our front door, so we know there is a need. But do come during the week, Mimi, and we'll come and say hi. But in time, we will expand our hours and our services as we continue to grow.
Thank you, and that was a good question. I might ask all the panel a question about events. So when we did the study, it was in 2019, which interesting was before COVID. And what we heard from the community was that they were happy with the number of large festivals and events that council was doing, but they would like to see smaller and more local activities. So one of the approaches is for us to do that. And I think a great goal would be to really distribute what we're doing to areas where we may not be doing so many events. So if I can ask the panel what type of events you like to attend.
Well, I guess I've managed a lot of events. I've produced a lot of events. I've performed at a lot of events and festivals in my career, lots and lots and lots. So now I don't really like going to them that much. But at the nub of it, I wouldn't have done that unless I love something about it. Okay, so the kind of things that I like to go to, they vary. I guess the part of me that is a little bit jaded is I get a little bit, I don't know about crowds. I don't necessarily want to be in big crowds very much because I've just done a lot of time in big crowds. But I do see the merits in spectacle, big, wonderful spectacle things. And so I think that they have a purpose, then they have a need. I really like quite intimate things as well. I like to have experiences that they might only be, you know, me and 10 other people in an enclosed little space, and it's you feel like you're in a special moment in time. I really like that experience, and I think actually a good, I think dare I say it, a council that is doing its job very well, actually offers that palette, you know, something local, something big and wonderful, but something importantly that, you know, something that is good for the businesses that are around it. And so it supports, you know, it supports the communities as well, and something that is great to walk down the street to, you know, a billy cart thing put on by your street. Like the whole palette is important. And I think, yeah, if you can hit a bit of all of that, then it's doing a good job.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. We did have someone ask some time ago about a billy cart race, but we couldn't get it past risk. But you never know. Dennis.
So I think just thinking about our young people and how we can look at ways and create pathways for them to be, given opportunities to be invited into spaces. And I just thought of an event that just passed recently, which young First Nations rapper Kobe D had the Rock the Block festival down at South Maroubra in the park. And it was a really great event, and which brought so many young people. My own experience, you know, being out here as well is sometimes, you know, young people do want to roam the streets and they do want to look forward to the weekend to catch up with their friends, but this is long, late hours as well. And it's something that is a concern, that our young people are, still running about late at night. That event in particular brought so many young people to one place where they felt so safe. They were invited not through just their parents and their families who came to the space, but these rappers and these performers spoke to them, and they spoke about their lived experiences. And I think young Kobe D, as a person who's grown up in the community and around here, spoke to many of those young people and spoke to many of us who could understand the power of performing and the power of art and what we can do to activate the space again, but invite younger people to come to a space where they can feel safe, but actually be told and listen to what the lyrics, what Kobe D talks about in some of his songs, to talk about healing, to talk about how we can become better people as we grow. So, yeah.
Thank you, Dennis. That's actually really powerful. And I think that's what I was thinking about in a slightly different way, is that when there are events that are driven by people, like for people, you know, they're actually driven by community. I think the strategy and the art study of 2019, there was a real expression of interest in those sort of smaller community-based events. And I think part of that is when the events are really, they feel like there's a need. And I was just thinking, I went to an event recently out at Parramatta where it was a community, it was a Hindi wedding, but it was open up to the public. So it was actually run by the community, sharing their own cultural traditions and their own joy, and their own arguments. Actually, there was this big family argument, and it became part of the spectacle, and it was fantastic. I shouldn't say that, but it was very authentic because it was by community for the community. And I think when you're experiencing that, it feels very authentic and quite privileged, rather than being, you know, seeing something a bit more generic and sort of overwhelming.
Thank you. There's some great ideas for us, I think, moving forward. And Dennis, it's interesting you talk about that event. It was a really successful event. Council supported it. I think one of the things councils found difficult in the past is holding events for youth, because youth don't necessarily engage with council, or they see something that council is doing and think that it's not for them or it's not cool enough. But I think that was a great example of how we could partner with other organisations to do something locally. We've got a question here from Jordan, who would love to hear thoughts on how creative businesses and community groups might be able to engage with the strategy more easily. Michael, did you have any thoughts on that? Partnering creative businesses and community groups?
Yeah, give it a shot.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the question is around your strategy and how they might get a handle on that and work together.
Yes.
I mean, I think when that happens, when you can get those things to line up, that's when you've actually got something really powerful. That's what's behind the question, is where, you know, there's an alignment between what the community want to do and the benefits for businesses. And sometimes that can happen through something that that you might lead, that Randwick might lead, for example. You might do a big event that is driven by community, but it's bang and smack in the middle of, I don't know, the Kingsford or wherever it is, like one of these kind of centres. So I guess the question is, what role can local government play there? And I think you can kind of lead the way, actually, because if you just ask everybody, oh, what would you like to go and do? Then people will just tell you the last thing that they saw on television or they saw on Instagram or whatever. Actually, I think what council can do is have professional people like Roxanne, who have great careers, knowing about this work, who can broker and take the first steps. And then they have conversations. Roxanne can talk, like this show she's talked about. She's worked with community, and those conversations can start. So actually, I think what council can do is what the strategy can do is help show the way, and then engage people in the conversation about how you can co-create it.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And I think we touched on it before about, at this point, we're starting to get a database of the local creatives in the area, and also creative businesses too. So I think that's a bit of a starting point, is for us to know who they are and where they are, and then how we can, involve partnerships as well. We're also looking at, in terms of small venues and live music venues, we've got some outcomes from our nighttime economy strategy too that we'd like to bring in to the cultural arts and culture strategy, where we can partner local live musicians and performers with other businesses as well. So that would be really exciting. Mark has asked, is there a budget attached to the strategy available for the community to review? Good question. And can you take us through how the strategy is funded and how it's been decided where the funds are spent? So what will happen is, now that the strategy is on exhibition and we're seeking feedback and comment from the community, once we have that, we will then put it up to council for endorsement, and there'll be a whole other resourcing strategy that backs this up, as well as a budget. So it hasn't happened yet. We're waiting to hear what the community's thoughts are, and once we have that, then we'll look at how we get the money for it. Okay. Question for you again, Dennis. How can council nurture more opportunities for Indigenous artists?
How we can nurture? For our First Nations communities, what many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities are doing around the nation is looking at programming to embed language in their educational programs. And I think here, in this, within this, community, I think it's definitely something that we, as council, to nurture that, to actually think about language and to have these consultations with community who hold this knowledge and who hold this rich, language that hasn't been spoken of every day as we come to work or as we come back to home. I'm constantly questioning when I am entering different spaces is language and Indigenous language, to see if that has been embedded in our landscapes and in our public spaces, is understanding language a lot more, so people can speak that and understand what the language is, but also that gives it's a powerful thing for community to be able to share that as well and to own that, because it is about reclaiming something that was theirs and something that they can celebrate. So I think if we can look into other programs and how we can nurture language would be a really powerful thing for community.
Perfect. Thank you. That's a great idea. I mean, Roxanne is doing some really wonderful programming here with some of the local community, but it's something that we haven't really looked into is the language, and some of the most powerful welcomes I've heard or songs I've heard have been through language. Yeah, so it's a really great experience. Roxanne, can you tell us about what sites council has as part of its management and how they will be utilised for cultural purposes?
Sure, thanks, Katie. So I think it's really exciting, actually, and this is embodied in the strategy. It talks a little bit about these amazing sites. Some are very much we're working in and talking in right now, but some are a little bit further away in the landscape. But it's pretty exciting, actually. Beyond the Perouse Museum, which is Randwick Council's primary cultural and arts facility currently, there are some amazing other gems in the landscape, some of which are operating now. And I'm thinking also about the Randwick Literary Institute, which is an amazing, gorgeous 1920s Art Deco building, almost at the other end of the LGA, up at Clovelly. And it's a 1920s building, paid for by the community, built by the community, and it's pretty much now Randwick Council's main community hire space. But the potential for it's so much more than that as well. So there are 4 main halls in that space, and it's now being professionally managed for community groups, arts groups to utilise that space. And that's very much in the strategy about developing that usage and continuing it. There's even sort of a new 5th space which is being explored as a potential pop-up space as well. So it's just a real gem. So we'd love to hear your comments on the RLI or the Literary Institute. And I think, which has already been mentioned, is Blenheim House, which is, really going to be such a cultural pearl, really, for Randwick. It's an amazing building in the heart of Randwick, built in 1848 by the first Randwick mayor. And it's the plans are about to happen, really, an artist enclave of 4 artist studios, as well as an exhibition space, which is really exciting. And I think the potential in studio, which is the 5th space, to be sort of a disabled access space, provides opportunities for artists who normally haven't been served so well by council facilities, which is really exciting. So the opportunity for this amazing space to generate new art and create a really nurturing environment where people can come and see that work being created, and consume it as well. I think that's a really exciting opportunity. And a little bit further away in the horizon, but on a bigger scale, which I think is really exciting, is the Newmarket Stables project. So there are great plans for that particular site. It's an iconic site. We all know it as a big stable. I help run an event in there, and it's an amazing space where you've got this massive internal space and all these little sort of jockey stables all the way around this main ecclesiastical space. So the potential for that building down the track, for it to be a sort of a precinct of creativity where smaller, artist practice can work in that space with something amazing happening in the middle. There's a lot of potential there as well. So yeah, there's a lot happening, a lot in development. And the museum, of course, is growing all the time. So yeah, quite a lot going on.
Thank you. It is very exciting. Michael, one of the strategic approaches we have in the strategy is to revitalise our laneways, so to develop some kind of laneway activation program. Can you tell us about where you've seen laneways activated successfully and what made them so good?
Sure. I'm actually, I've got to work in a laneway at the moment. is in the Haymarket in the city. It's a temporary artwork that I conceived and made with a guy called Chris Fox, is an architect, and a woman called Emma Saunders. And that work was made for to create a kind of, in this kind of very neglected part of the city, a place where people could dance. And it was conceived at the time when nobody was allowed to dance. So now if you go down to the Haymarket, you can dance outdoors in this little laneway. And I talk about that work because for me, that job of making kind of neglected or scary or, you know, kind of trying to turn around the associations we have with kind of service laneways and things can be really, you know, art and culture can really help lift that experience and can be a great kind of social connector and community connector, and can make something somewhere that you kind of want to get through in a hurry to somewhere that you want to linger. And that's a really lovely experience. Of course, everybody, you talk about laneways, everybody will always point to that strip in Melbourne, etc., you know, where you've got all those cafes, etc. I think that is a very typical kind of example. And yet, you know, it says there are some great examples of that down there. I think Sydney is increasingly do that, but I would also, you know, I went to this wonderful art triennale in this cluster of islands in Japan 2 years ago, and this island, a lot of these islands were fishing villages, but in the last 30 years, nobody wants, you know, the young people don't want to fish, they don't want to be fishing people anymore, so they've all gone to the big cities. And now the last 10 years, I've been running an arts project there for 3 months every 3 years. And it's full of these little laneways, tiny little laneways, only, you know, as wide as here to there sort of thing. And there are old houses that have been turned into artworks, and it's become this real destination. And when I went there, I actually went there 10 years ago, and then I just went there again 2 years ago. Now, what was happening was there are these fantastic artworks in these places, interactive experiences and things, but also just next door, somebody was selling a whole bunch of mandarins, or somebody else was having a kind of garage sale in their basement. So I think what happens when you start to do art projects in these laneways, the art it's like a kind of leader. It's, you know, and other stuff starts to follow it. And that is people, and it's community, and it's stories, and it's engagement. It's a whole bunch of other things can come from those projects. So yeah, I think they're a great potential mine, you know, for cultural richness.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Maybe we can visit that laneway in Japan one time. Or create it. We'll recreate it in Matraville or Kingsford. I've got a question here. A local creative living in Little Bay and working in Randwick would like to know the best way to engage with council with ideas for activations, events and workshops. So this is a great opportunity. You can provide that feedback through the Your Say website now. We will also be doing a call out once the strategy is endorsed as an expression of interest for any local artists in the area, so that we can start building that database. So you can put your feedback at the moment on the Your Say. You can also always just email the council at randwick.nsw.gov.au email. Always love to hear any ideas. Michael, last question for you. What have you seen as some of the long-term benefits of integrating arts and culture into placemaking? And I know you've kind of talked about this already, but is there anything that you've seen in terms of a long-term project that's really had a lot of benefit to a community?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, isn't it? Because it's great at the moment that in Randwick there's an appetite, and at council level there's an appetite for engaging in culture and spending money and finding budgets and all that sort of stuff that this process is part of. That's great. 10 years time, 15 years time, that might go downhill for a bit. Okay, so sometimes it goes up and sometimes it goes down. And us, and as artists, we know that you just got to go when you've got the opportunity. And you know, so I guess the question is around benefit. That's what you're asking. And it's hard to measure benefit, actually. And a few years ago, when I was working for the state government, I was working for an organisation that had all different projects all around New South Wales, actually. But and some places were really into this idea of doing, you know, events or activations and things, and they didn't need to be doing it. And other places desperately needed it, and they weren't doing it at all. And then it all came back to this issue of benefit. Like, how do we measure value? How do we know whether that is $50,000 well spent or not? And, you know, you can measure benefits by, in terms of economic benefits, you can measure social benefits, you can measure environmental benefits. There's a bit of research that we started back then, and I've been working with some academics from UNSW and from Newcastle and from Macquarie Uni, that is about how do we put a value on the benefits of creative or culture-led placemaking. So if you go to the City People website, you can find out a bit of reading about that, and we're about to put out a toolkit so that people can start to measure those benefits, so that then in 10 years' time, when there's a whole bunch of right-wing people in the council saying, oh, we'll just get rid of that arts budget, you can say, well, hang on a second. We've been measuring for 10 years the benefits of doing, you know, whatever it is, NOx or whatever it is, you know, we can show you that it's got all of these benefits. So that's an argument that I think people have to get, we all have to get more savvy. We as artists, we have to do that. We have to get able to stand up and say, look, yeah, this is actually good for that business or that community. And it's not just about touchy-feely, makes me feel warm. It actually, we finding ways to make the arguments elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Really tangible. Thank you. Good points. And I think the other point too is that it's not always council just having to spend the money or come up with the budgets. There is, you know, some stuff in the strategy around partnerships. You know, we've got NIDA, which is a nationally recognised dramatic arts institute in our city. So there's lots of great stuff happening there. But how can council partner with them to market that to our community? We've got the University of New South Wales, who also has a really strong arts and culture sector. So yeah, to your point, not just always us having to fund it, but what's already happening in the city that we can promote for the community as well. The hospital, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Before we wrap up, just one last final question. What is one idea that government can do to support the creative arts?
I think I said my answer to this question just earlier about language, and I think I might stick with that too. Yeah.
And passing the baton, working in government, local government, I think our job is what we could do is listen. Is to listen to community, listen to artists express their need, and provide spaces and partnerships where we can make things really happen.
That's good. Yes. I think government can enable, because there is, like, those people who are making comments, people want to do stuff. How can I do this? How can I do that? People want to do it. And so what government can do is act as enablers. You can't always find the money. You can't always pay for everything, okay? But you can stitch together the connections. And then when somebody does have a great idea, you can have somebody in government that says, okay, that's a great idea. How can I help that through the myriad of government processes that we have, because that's what government needs? How can I help enable that person's good idea to get up? That's it's an unsung virtue of what government can do, I think.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. You're absolutely right. Great ideas. I'd like to thank all of our panel experts, Roxanne, Dennis and Michael. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation and for helping us to get everyone excited, hopefully, about where the arts and culture strategy is going. So from here, as I said, you're able to provide your comments until the 28th of June. We'll review those comments and put that into our final strategy that will go up to council for endorsement, and then we'll get busy working on budgeting and implementing the actions out of the strategy. Just to give a bit of a plug, we've also got 2 other strategies out on exhibition at the moment, the integrated transport strategy and the open space and recreation strategy. There's webinars tomorrow night and Wednesday night on those too. So if you're interested, you can register there. Thank you. Thank you.